Right, comrades, eyes down, look in. So we're looking at building a healthy communist culture with Archie Woodrow, Mike Macnair, and Cat Rylance. So we'll start with Cat first. Comrade, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to join the session at the last minute. This is obviously something that I've raised a lot in and with the CPGB. Is a question of our political in the last session about the low level of a culture of discussion on the left as a whole, an aversion to expressing differences, lack of development and seriousness about the way that we treat political discussion. These are massive problems on the left, and by exploring and emphasising, as I will do in this talk, the problems with the problems that I would identify with the CPGB culture, it's not at all to ignore all of these bigger and wider questions on the left as a whole, but again, it is directed at trying to develop our own trend within that. So that's the purpose of it, and I certainly don't want it to be taken as an argument for having that culture of diplomacy or having that suppression of differences. Absolutely not. It's about trying to look at how we can develop ourselves. Another point also is obviously we've been over these discussions quite a lot, and I think it's important to have these discussions. I think it's important to lay these discussions out, but also, as I said on Thursday, sort of a critique of some of Tass's thoughts around culture is that we need to write about culture, we need to express what we understand as a healthy culture, but culture also is not something that changes just by declaring a change in culture. It's something that changes through interaction, it changes through the exchange and the coming together with others. So as much as I think, and I do because I try to do it, as much as I think it's important to talk about and lay out culture, culture is also something that needs to change in practice, and ultimately that is how it changes in practice. So as I say, my points around culture here are primarily directed at the CPGB, and obviously then hopefully we can have a discussion around that, and hopefully a debate as well. I think primarily when we think about culture, it has to be informed and driven by an assessment of our tasks. And obviously in the previous session, we laid out a lot of what our tasks are, what the work of the organisation should be, and the culture should be informed by the tasks that are in front of us. So on the one hand, we have the question of how we take the project forward, and we establish that that involves defeating trends of opportunism, bureaucratisation within the left, and it also involves the process of drawing together, cohering and developing our own forces. So that's some of the tasks that we need to do. But we also have the task also of our basic reproduction of our trend, paiderisation, the development of leaderships, and so on. So these are the activities that we need to be doing, and our culture that we require should be informed by those tasks. So the question is how we build a culture that allows us to do these things effectively. I think that there's two questions, and they're obviously massively interrelated, but there's the question of the internal culture, how we deal with differences within the organisation, how we deal with minorities, how we deal with expressions of difference and dissent within the organisation. So our internal culture, but as a project that orientates towards the rest of the left and the question of going through the left and regroupment, we also have fundamentally our external culture, which in this case is how we relate to others on the left and how we interact with and advance our projects with others on the left. So these points certainly interrelate, but I'll kind of cover them slightly separately. So on the question of internal culture, hopefully not caricaturing the CPGB's position. This is sort of something that Mike said at one of the FCU meetings. So obviously, please do correct me if this is an inaccurate representation. But the idea, I would understand, driving the approach of internal culture within the CPGB is that we want to toughen ourselves within the organisation. So that means necessarily harsh exchanges. That means you have a go at someone, they have a go at you back. And through that combative exchange, you develop into somebody who is able to articulate your arguments strongly, is able to support them, is confident to make those exchanges within the wider movement. So it makes you into a strong cadre who can confidently advance these arguments and confidently advance this project in the wider movement. So I think, you know, obviously not to say that this would be an enjoyable experience for most people, but if it did the job, then I probably wouldn't criticize it so much. My problem is I don't think it does the job. I don't see the evidence that it does the job. I see a minority of people come out of this process strengthened and extremely strong comrades, but a lot of people get spat out by this process. A lot of people become disillusioned, or, you know, for me, for example, just go off in a huff and you're like, right, I'm done with it now. Or some people submit to it and maybe stop asking questions or stop raising points, or maybe they join in sometimes with, you know, little put downs where we all get to have a good laugh at somebody, because you don't want it turning on you. So when I look at these things from a pedagogical point of view, this is not how people learn and become critical thinkers. And I'm thinking about this from my own experiences. I've worked in adult education for a long time, and the process by which people become independent critical thinkers, I see very differently to that. I see that we live in a society where the structures of authority and hierarchy discipline us from the very beginning of our life. Through school, through the workplace, in the public sphere, anywhere we go, we feel the effects of authority hang over us all of the time. And when we come into a revolutionary organisation, we're not liberated from that. We reproduce these structures. So when we see this, you know, put downs and things like that from leaderships, it doesn't encourage critical, independent thinking in the membership. It encourages the same patterns of behaviour that we get in our everyday life. It encourages submission. And Mike has made the point, when I kind of made some of these points previously, Mike has made the point that the sort of liberal culture and the suppression of free speech, etc., acts against the culture of the working class that does involve combative exchanges. And I absolutely agree. That is what working class culture does look like. But what working class experiences also look like is being a stupid kid in school who gets dismissed by the teacher all of the time. I'm just thinking about an experience in communist students. We're having an interaction with Workers' Power, and one of my comrades said to someone from Workers' Power, as you were no doubt told in school by your teacher, must do better. And that's not the way that I want to see us talking to other comrades, not because it upsets people and not because it's uncivil, but because it is reproducing structures of authority onto each other, and that does not develop critical thinkers, that does not develop independent thinkers. So I think this point about working class culture is actually completely missing the point from my perspective, because it is ignoring the exercise of these behaviours by leaderships onto memberships, and that looks very different to what you know, to this peer-to-peer combative culture. Another aspect of internal culture that I think, or I recognise myself as being something that acts against what we want to achieve. We all want to achieve the same thing. We all want to achieve critical self-activating, confident members of the party. We want to achieve a situation where we have tons of people who could take on a leadership position, tons of people who could be going out and putting forward our arguments confidently. That's what we all want to achieve, and I am in no doubt about that that's what we all want to achieve, and we're trying through our various means to get at the same thing. But this is, you know, informed by kind of conversations with other people. I think one of the things that I see as a problem related to that is this sort of every scratch can turn into a gangrene. So anytime there's a little thing, you have to really make sure you root it out. You have to go after it. You have to relentlessly attack it. Otherwise, it might take over the whole organisation and cause a sickness that debilitates us to death. I was talking about it with a comrade from Prometheus, and I think he made a very good point. Actually, most scratches in a healthy body heal completely fine on their own. So if we're a healthy body, surely we should be able to withstand that space to have some criticisms, to have some mistakes, to have stupid questions, to have someone who can put their hand up and feel free to express some kind of not completely formed idea. In education, in pedagogy, it's precisely by being able to put yourself out there and ask a stupid question or begin to form and articulate your ideas. That's precisely how you develop and precisely how you become independent and critical thinking. Another one of the Dutch comrades on Discord made a very good point that when we have these discussions, the CPGB make the argument that okay, this isn't perfect, this isn't exactly, ideal, but it's better than the alternative of diplomacy, because diplomacy closes down the expression of differences. But the comrade made the point that actually sometimes this kind of every scratch could be a gangrene. This approach isn't the opposite of diplomacy. Often it's experienced by people simply as the flip side of diplomacy. It's experienced as another way in which differences and discussion can be clamped down. So I'm not saying that is necessarily done as an active thing, but that's how it's experienced by individuals. Suddenly we aren't putting forward our differences. Suddenly we aren't expressing our differences because this culture isn't received as having given somebody the space to do that. And I'm not particularly concerned so much about people's intentions. I'm concerned about the practical effects. What is the practical effect that is having in an organisation? Practically speaking, is it developing people? Is it giving us the space to develop our differences? And those are the things that concern me. So those are the points on internal culture. How long have I got left? Sorry. 2 minutes. Okay, excellent. So on external culture, again, one of the points that is made when we raise these issues of culture and the issues of the way that we report or the way that we interact with others on the left, that we might want speech controls. Definitely not. And I've never heard anybody in our trend argue for speech controls. It's not a question of saying you can't say this or you can't speak like that or you can't use that word. It is a question of effectiveness. It's, as Alex said on Thursday, it's a question of political sense. That is what should motivate our interaction. So there is nothing off the cards. There is no policing of what you're going to say, but that does not mean that we should not hold each other to account and criticise each other if we think that we could be approaching this better. And that's the framing of this discussion. It's not a demand for civility, it's a demand for effectiveness. If in some circumstances it makes sense to have an extremely harsh polemic, then we have an extremely harsh polemic, but we don't have it as a default setting with anybody that we interact with. And that's kind of relates to the point from the previous session. That's why the centrality of a strategy about how we push the project forward is fundamental, because that needs to inform then how we approach others on the left, how we interact with different forces. It keeps us away from having a default setting because we're able to differentiate how we approach things with different comrades. What will encourage somebody to take on these ideas? What will encourage somebody to come towards these ideas? some of the ways of the attachment to harsh polemic, it's almost expressed, or the way that I've seen it in the past, as a duty. If something is damaging to the movement, or if something is a wrong idea, it is our duty to condemn it in the harshest terms possible. But that's not how I would see it. It's our duty to defeat it. And defeating it might look like many different things. Seeing it as our duty to condemn it in the harshest terms possible almost takes on a moral character, that because it's so bad, we have to really tell everybody how much we hate it and they're all a piece of shit, or whatever it might be. But no, it's our duty to defeat it. And defeating also looks like persuasion. Defeating also looks like winning people over. And that's what should be directing our interventions externally. Just to keep it brief, but obviously the points about being in the movement, having the trust of those that we relate to so they can actually engage with our ideas. People are not robots. They're not people without experiences or sensitivity or feelings. They have to trust you before you can actually open yourself up to engage with the ideas. You can have the best arguments in the world, but we can't expect people to receive them in any form that we deliver them to others. I think Archie will cover some other points, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. And like any good teacher, finishes perfectly on time. Right, so comrade Mike, over to you.
Yeah. I've written about this too much, but I'm just going to start very basic points. Is the left in a better place now than it was in the 1970s? You know, is the process of caderization of comrades in the left more successful now than in the 1970s? Is there more practical unity of left organizations now than there was in the 90s? It's exactly the reverse. It's exactly the reverse. And the argument, and this is the argument, I know comrades have got, it's not the same thing, etc., etc. But in my understanding, the reason why it's exactly the reverse is because comrades have coming out of the Trotskyist tradition in origin, have committed themselves to anti-factionalism in their own organizations. And the idea in particular that it's a waste of time to have the internal discussion, we ought to be going out to the masses. And going along with that, to Georgy Dimitrov's arguments in the 7th Congress of the Comintern, that the United Front involves partial suppression of criticism. Dimitrov argues, in order to have unity, we say, the Social Democrats say, we can't have unity with you because you're so harsh and criticize us. We say we will not criticize anybody except somebody who breaks the unity. This has become the absolute fucking normal for pretty much everyone. I'm going to exempt Comrade Gabriel from this, but in terms of the British far left, I'm not going to say this is a general thing across the far left in general, because I read the French left press, and although it's not like the Weekly Worker, it's not characterized by this. We only talk to the masses. We don't talk about other people. The discussions which the MUG guys are engaged in and which Cosmonaught carries, you've got considerable sharpness of polemic within the DSA and so on and so forth. So it's not, I don't think it's exclusively British. It's the Mandelites, the political culture of the Mandelite Fourth International, not as it was in the 1970s, but as it became after it broke up and the American Socialist Workers' Party, the split in favor of Castroism. The Mandelites have become, I call them Euro-Trotskyists, because they're like the Euro-communists. They have a Marxism Today style politics with a Trotskyist coloration to it. But it's become the absolute dominant politics, and it was also Cliff. Yeah, it was always Cliff. It was the guy who used to sell me Socialist Worker in 1973, 74 used to say, get a copy of the comic this week, comrade. Because he understood that Socialist Worker dumbed itself down in order to pretend to be the left-wing equivalent of the Sun. Okay, so then if I say this, then my point is that the left of the 1970s made more cadre and didn't make as many splits. And it made more cadre and it didn't make as many splits, partly first because it wasn't obsessed with we have to go out, apart from the SWP, wasn't obsessed with we have to go out and talk to the masses and we can't talk among ourselves. But secondly, there was nothing resembling this culture of there needs to be trust and there needs to be respect. I was back when I was back in the 1970s, I was either queer bashed or anti-Pavlovite bashed. I was never quite sure which, by a member of the Workers' Revolutionary Young Party Young Socialists who attacked me in the street when I was walking home drunk. And I was rescued by a guy from the right wing of the TNGW branch, TNGWU branch of which I was a member. And the point here is actually the basis of the need for solidarity is not personal trust, is not agreement. It's the objective need for solidarity, which is expressed in trade union organizations, which also is expressed in why the masses turned out to vote Labour in 2010, when it looked as though the bourgeois press was going to achieve the object of driving Labour into third place, and the urban, because it's that basic objective need for solidarity in spite of disagreements, in spite of very sharp political disagreements. And anti-factionalism, in essence, the proposition that disagreements have to be expressed respectfully. Got somewhere here an article from 2016 in relation to the Labour Party. A starting point for all our actions as members of a party and a movement is to treat all people with dignity and respect. This applies to all our dealings with people offline and online. Harassment, intimidation, hateful language, and bullying are never acceptable, nor is any form of discrimination on the basis of gender, race, religion, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. Debate among party members should be comradely, acknowledging that whatever our diverse views, we are one party with shared goals. This is the National Executive Committee's Code of Conduct, which was used to victimize anti-Zionist campaigners on the ground that their anti-Zionist, that their campaigning was rude, intimidatory, etc., etc., etc. So where we are, okay, Cat sees this from the point of view of CPGB, PCC is a majority leadership which is intimidating the members from the base. We see it from the point of view, we are a small minority which thinks that in order to achieve unity, we've got to achieve unity on the basis that people will still be Cliff State Caps, people will still be Grantites, people will still be, we were talking the other day about, we had Michael Bettany in membership, and he was close to being official communist. but he was willing to work within the framework of our organization with its. We're going to have people with sharp political differences. And if we say that we have to have the political differences have to be expressed with respect and means of building up trust and so on and so forth, actually that works to create not expressing the political differences. I give a couple of examples. One, rs21 comrades. rs21 issued a statement about Lindsay German on gender. And the statement started, we would not usually comment on the ideas of other left groups. Well, excuse me, why? Because if you would not usually comment on the ideas of other left groups, you're saying we're not interested in debating with other left groups. We're only interested in talking to the masses, and debating with other left groups is a distraction. You know? And of course, actually talking about what Lindsay German said on gender was an extremely rare example of rs21 publicly discussing with other left groups. And the problem is, it's precisely this method which results, in the first place, results in the fact that people can't stay in organizations, because it's wasting your time being a minority in an organization when you're arguing with the majority, when you ought to be out there talking to the masses. Also, people can't put up with being dissed. Either the majority can't put up with being dissed by the minority, or the minority can't put up with being dissed by the majority. And so people walk out prematurely. Actually, the effect is, moreover, at the end of the day, the people who at the end of the day get to say define what's acceptable is the trade union bureaucracy, is Jeremy, because if we're trying to talk friendly with the SWP in a way that the SWP comrades won't think is offensive, the SWP comrades are trying to talk friendly in a way in which the trade union leadership and Jeremy Corbyn won't think it's offensive. That's reflected in the character of socialist worker across the board. Where am I time-wise? 2 minutes. Okay. I'm not going to make much more say much more on this point. It's not something which we can separate from internal debates, because it may well be the case that comrades who are holding a minority position are in minority position in the CP, defending what is actually CPGB, defending what is actually the majority position of the general left. And actually, some of our debates have had that character. And then, excuse me, we're fighting to defend our minority positions against the position of the general left, which comrades who are in the minority in CPGB happen to be at this moment in time defending. And that can perfectly well be the case in a larger organization, and go back to scratch to the danger of gangrene. This is Trotsky in the debate in the Socialist Workers' Party in 1938-39 about Soviet defense, and the reality of what was going on in that debate, it's an ambiguous debate, because I personally think that Trotsky and Cannon were wrong to force a split at the moment in time at which they forced a split. But it's clear that Shachtman and Burnham and those guys were defending a minority position in the American Socialist Workers' Party, but it was the majority position of the Democrat and Republican parties in the United States. That is that you had to oppose the Soviet invasion of Finland and the Soviet invasion of Poland. That was the general orthodoxy. So it's not straightforward to say we can say we segregate off the question of the internal and the external. And it's not straightforward, it's certainly not the case that we can say the problem is if we say, oh, Nick Rack says that it's an insult, and I call the comrade's position a Bakuninist position. It's a political characterization. How the hell else am I supposed to make that political characterization? Actually, if I used other language, they would still say it's an insult. It's if you say that we say tactically, Dimitrov is not saying that the communists stop believing that though they wind up, the communists stop believing that the social democrats are scabs, but he's not saying that. He's saying we just don't talk about it tactically. We want to persuade people. So I don't think that these issues are separable from a struggle which needs to be had to get rid of what is in fact a political culture of deference to the Labour bureaucracy and of internalising the political norms of the Labour bureaucracy. That's it.
Right. Thank you. And Archie, over to you.
Thanks very much. So, yeah, political culture, very big topic. When coming to this, I wasn't quite sure where to start with it because it's so broad. And I thought that given that this is an event that is hosted every year in the past by the Communist Party of Great Britain, that I was invited to speak on this panel by a member of the Communist Party of Great Britain, but I'm here in dialogue with the Communist Party of Great Britain. I thought that the appropriate way to approach this conversation is to respect the political culture of the Communist Party of Great Britain by slagging you off terribly.
Great.
Unfortunately for me, but luckily for you, they rejigged the panel at the last minute to invite one of the world's leading experts on slagging off the CPJ. And has done a very good job of that, and we'll have an even more detailed and comprehensive article about that, hopefully coming out very soon, which I've read a draft of, a very, very good article. Which takes away a lot of what I was going to say. So I'm going to start by responding to a few of the points that Mike raised, and then depending on how much time I've got left, I'm going to slag off Jack a bit. So, okay, to start with, just coming back on what Mike was saying, I mean, a lot of the sort of general principles of what you're saying, I agree with, about the importance of open debate between tendencies, the problems of, and you know, I've certainly seen this. In rs21, I only joined a couple of years ago. I was never in the Socialist Workers' Party before, but we do see this sort of cultural hangover of that tendency you talk about from Tony Cliff and so on, about the tendency to suppress open political debates between tendencies and a refusal to engage with other parts of Britain. We've been having that argument internally within rs21, and I think actually rs21 is improving on that front. I think we're making some progress in that debate. On what you're saying about the way that the left was much stronger in the 70s, built more cadre, had less splits, and you're arguing that partly this was because it was less obsessed with, you know, trust and respect, and it recognised the necessity of working together because, you know, otherwise you can't achieve anything. You need that. And I accept that to a point, but I think there's a flip side to that, and that it's precisely because of our weakness and our fragmentation that suddenly it's important again to care about trust and respect. Because I mean, part of the necessity of working together, it's when you're trying to achieve something practically, and when you've got different relevant political forces that recognise they need to work with one another in order to achieve something. Unfortunately, if you're a tiny group of 20 people with, as discussed in the previous session, not really much or any involvement in active struggles, it's very easy for the rest of the left to just say, well, why do we care what you have to say? Okay, you go have your sharp polemics in a corner somewhere, we'll just ignore you. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to the movement, it's irrelevant to the class, it's irrelevant to us. I'm not saying that it's good that they treat it like that and refuse to engage with those arguments, but it's much easier just to ignore it. And, you know, if you're being needlessly rude to people, if you're misrepresenting people's arguments, people are less inclined to agree with them, particularly if they don't have a reason that means they're forced to agree, to engage with it. And also, actually, there's objective factors that come into this as well, in that it's much easier to split nowadays. Back in the old days, you used to need to have a newspaper. If you want to get your ideas out, you've got to have a newspaper, you've got to have a printing press, it means you've got to work together, you've got to have a collective organisation. Nowadays, you can just be a one-man party press tweeting on social media in your bedroom. You don't need to be in an organisation. And actually, and it relates to the sort of wider decline of civil society and working class infrastructure and organisation. Most young people have never been in a membership organisation or in a political organisation, don't know what it's like, don't know what the point of it is. And a lot of the time, people of my generation, their only engagement with a membership political organisation either was the Labour Party or was being aggressively recruited into the SWP when they were a student, being in it for 6 months, absolutely hating it and leaving. So people have got less incentive than they used to join an organisation. And also, again, the smaller an organisation is, the more fragmented organisations are, the less the incentives there are against splitting. If you're in a mass communist party with hundreds of thousands or millions of members, you're not going to split over something trivial, because you know there's obviously good reasons why you'd stay in that party. If the party's only got 20 people, or even, you know, SWP, probably the biggest one in Britain at the moment, something like 2,000 members, it's still not that big, doesn't amount to much easier to justify splitting from it. So I think that there are other ways that the context has changed from the 70s. And if you want people even to be in the same room together talking to one another, you do need to get them to engage and to take you seriously. And if you're, again, and particularly if you misrepresent people, if being involved in your organisation, being engaged with your dialogue is just unpleasant and doesn't seem to have any practical implications, then why would people bother? So and it's not to say you therefore need to neglect the political criticisms, but just have a bit of, as Pat says, a bit of political sense in how you engage with people, how you make the arguments. And, you know, I started off, sorry, there's also a point here that I think that the CPGB need to grasp about the difference. I mean, you can do this when you're in person. When you're in writing, it's like talking to very different people. And, you know, often, you know, when we're having these conversations in a room like this, we can have a useful, productive, meaningful dialogue. Someone writes in a letter to the Weekly Worker, you just get all strange and defensive and don't really engage with what they've said and just start to be, I think the first time I wrote into the Weekly Worker was to complain about how useless the conversation had become between talking about socialism and CPGB, because it just, the back and forth letters in print were just not engaging with one. And also to, you know, to say it's illustrative. I chose to open this with the sort of joke about slagging you guys off, not just for the hopeful comic effect, but also as an illustrative point that in this context, you know, speaking to you in person with a cheeky grin on my face and with, you know, some members of the CPGB that I've spoken to before, have some degree of personal relationship with, I can trust that you will take those remarks in the spirit that they're intended. And that, you know, Jack and Tina and Mike, and none of you are going to go home and cry yourselves to sleep at night because we've been so rude and unpleasant about the CPGB. And I was shocked the first time I met Jack Conrad at one of the, I wasn't particularly, I had some involvement in the forging communist unity process. It was less involved than Cat and some of the others, but went to one of the in-person meetings, and I was expecting to meet this domineering, obnoxious ogre of a figure incapable of listening to other people, incapable of taking other people's ideas seriously. And I was shocked to discover that in person, the infamous Jack Conrad turned out to be perfectly pleasant, perfectly polite, civilized, reasonable, capable of tact and diplomacy. Shock horror. That, you know, a sensitive, you know, genuinely seemed to be interested in listening to, understanding, and engaging with opposing points of view. It's a shame that the Forging Communist Unity talks ended up breaking down. I was less engaged with them after that point for various reasons that I won't go into. But that in-person meeting, I thought we had a very productive and healthy dialogue, and partly because people in that context were capable of practicing a form of diplomacy, not the sort of diplomacy that you rightly criticize, but again, the political sense of being able to talk to one another as human beings in an intelligent way. And yeah, I think it also it swings back a bit to some of the questions of internal culture and internal organisation that Kat touched on. You know, just a piece of practical advice for you is, Jack, you need to let them edit you. And it does sometimes come across that you've ended up as the guy who's too important to edit. But actually, I think a lot of your writing would be better received if it had more of a critical eye on the editing. And you know, there's a use. Sorry, apologies by the way to Jack for picking on him so much. But my calculation here is that he's a big boy and he can take it. And if not, I'll buy him a drink later and we'll make up and we'll be friends again, I'm sure. But you know, a few months ago, he wrote an article in the Weekly World about the history of the IS tradition, that, you know, the SWP that rs21 eventually was a split out of, their relationship to the question of the programme. And the first half of this article was very interesting, very informative, although I've later been told that it was kind of a recycling of things that had been written previously. But it went off on a weird tangent on the end, where it just became a bit of a rant against my comrade David Renton from rs21. And, you know, fair enough, some of the things raised in it are legitimate questions, legitimate criticisms. I mean, some of the stuff that Dave wrote during the Labour, before I was a member of rs21. Actually, I think it may have been when David left for a bit. I forget the chronology. Anyway, but so fair enough to ask some questions about, you know, what was his position then? What's his involvement now? What does that mean? Does rs21 now agree with the things he wrote then? But it made for a very strange article, because it was a very interesting sort of history and then just a tangent attacking Dave Renton. And having spoke to Jack about it since, I came to realise that really the purpose of the article was a sort of fishing expedition to find out some information about rs21's internal politics, because, you know, he'd seen Dave writing on the website a bit, wondered what his role in the organisation became. You know, to be fair, this also just reflects some of the cultural problems within rs21, actually, that we're not very good sometimes at communicating what is the state of health and debate, and we should get better. I think we have been getting better. But there are simpler ways to find that out than denouncing someone in a newspaper. You could just send us a, you know, you could just ask. And actually, it's again quite an interestingly illustrated point. It links back to some of the discussion in the previous session about engagement with social movement struggle. It turns out that myself, Jack, and David Renton all live basically within walking distance of the venue where the local Palestine meetings happen. And those meetings have been happening every week for the last 18 months. So I understand you're a busy man, but I know, you know, a meeting every week is a lot. And you know, I'm not saying you need to turn up to every one, but if you just turned up to those occasions, you could have run into me or run into Dave, and we could have just had a chat about this. And then you could have wrote a much more interesting, much more informed article about the current politics of rs21, rather than having to do this sort of weird critical fishing expedition. And yes, and then there's another, that brings on to the point I wanted to end on, I think. Great. Which is that, you know, with those local Palestine meetings, one of the things that's very striking about them is their diversity and their youth in a way that is quite unlike a lot of political meetings that you go, quite unlike, unfortunately, this meeting, where the you know, balance of who's in the room is very, very different. But one of the striking things about those meetings, it's not just lots of young, diverse people. To a significant extent, it's lots of young, diverse people who want to talk about communism. and somewhat are frustrated by the fact that the local Palestine meeting doesn't give them a forum for that, and often they don't know what the forum is or where they're supposed to go. Yeah, just at the end of the last session, one of the other rs21 comrades who attended today, I was speaking to, and asked me the question, are all the other young people here Dutch? which anyway, and you know, I appreciate what Mike said in the last session, that when you've got limited resources, you have to focus. And what you said about the need to focus on the publication, I see the logic of that. Perhaps that was the right call. So I'm not trying to say you're all idiots for doing that. I'm not saying that doesn't make sense, but you know, it's a situation that you've been left in and problems that you now have. So I'm hopefully offering a sort of comradely critique of where we've got. And I think this is one of the points where rs21 has managed to be a bit different and done quite well. And we can be a bit self-congratulatory in rs21. I think too self-congratulatory. I think we have our own cultural problems that we don't talk about enough. But I think one of the reasons that rs21 often does manage to have in some ways a better culture than a lot of other Marxist groups is because it's managed to bridge that generational divide, and not just in terms of, you know, there are some groups that, yes, they bring in a lot of new members, but then those new members leave quite quickly. And I think having, you know, the majority but I think the large majority now of rs21's members were never in the SWP. But that's not just in the rank and file, it's also in the branch leaderships and in the national leaderships. There actually is quite good turnover and rotation. It's not just, you know, the same old people in the same positions of leadership. And I think that has a huge effect in opening up the culture in all sorts of ways and allowing a creativity, a welcome, and helping to make an organisation that people want to be a part of. And I'll just leave that.
Thank you very much. Well, comrades, I think we'll all agree that it's a very good presentation. So the first hand I saw was that of Yasemin, and
Shall I speak?
yes.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'm going to address some of the points that Kat has said, although I thought I addressed quite a few of them only 2 nights ago, but I will repeat myself. So first, on this idea that we are not involved in the movement, I think that is I really don't know what else I could do as an individual for being involved in a movement. I'm one of the most active staff in the occupation in Oxford. I was in Oxford. I also am one of the most active members of staff to support the students who've been victimized. I give about 3-4 public talks a week, not a month, a week. I edit an academic journal, but it does put me in touch with a lot of left-wing people. And I have to write an article for Weekly Worker. Literally, and contrary to what Taz said, we are not full-timers. We have a couple of full-timers, or 1 or 2 retired, but most of us have full-time jobs, right? So how else can I do more in the movement? It's a bit of a, I'm sorry, but I see that as an insult to the kind of work I do, that someone comes to tell me you're not in the movement. And I think we have to be careful not to give abstract ideas about involvement in the movement, right? Various comrades have similar experiences. I just don't want to explain their personal involvement. In terms of strategy, you say we don't have a strategy about political groups of the left. Both cell level and PCC level, we discuss every paper of the left. And it's not either as an academic exercise or to just say how rubbish they are. In fact, I used to do a socialist worker, but then I've been too lazy, not doing anything in the movement, and Jack has taken over. But we often actually discuss good articles in SWP, and in OCF, Jack repeats that. He actually praises the article. We evaluate changes in the editorial of Socialist Worker, Morning Star. We evaluate changes in resisting socialism, and we do read rs21. You say it's an organized. Well, you say it's an organization where the leadership is young, moving, dynamics. Yes, but you also don't have a serious political line. I'm sorry. You have tens of different political lines. That, if I had such an organization, I would say let everyone rule the leadership. I couldn't care less. So I think this accusation about strategy is, and it keeps getting repeated. I really don't know. The argument about the language use. Now, okay, you can have convoluted sentences to explain what disagreements happen on the matter of transition. Very often, to give a historic short representation is, in my opinion, more efficient than write 10 paragraphs to explain why the argument, for example, about the middle classes and the petty bourgeoisie can have dangerous consequences. I think that actually sharpens rather than reduces the argument. In terms of internal culture, I'm very sorry, but both of you are not internal to CPGB. Kat's experience is at least a decade old. And if I remember correctly, most of the arguments was not with the then, at some stage it came with the then PCC, but quite a lot of the arguments, at least in the case of the other comrade, who used to take me as his lawyer to defend him against dictatorship or whatever, was against the student leadership. The student group's leadership wasn't with the rest of the PCC. At least that's my experience. I wasn't on the PCC, I wasn't on the student leadership, so I was the lawyer, basically, to represent the harm that had been done. I think that culture has changed because people have changed, and because there are different attitudes to various issues at different times. I personally go to my cell every week expecting the worst. At times it happens, at times it's quite friendly. But I usually expect the worst, given what has been published, what has been said. Jack refers to the kind of challenges he's had in his cell, and I find it mind-blowing, from criticism of obvious positions that should be in an article, which should have been taken for granted that that was the organization's position, to format of the paper, fonts for the paper, the way the weekly worker fundraising is going on, and so on. So I'm sorry, but maybe I'm in the wrong part of this organization. I don't recognize this internal culture that you're talking about. I understand that if one has difficulties, even if it's more than a decade old, it's very difficult to separate from it. It's very difficult to forget about those. But I don't think making a mountain out of them and expecting everything to be exactly the same, and maybe relying on, I would say, gossip rather than reality of what happens, I think that doesn't help us. It doesn't help me, who wants to understand what is wrong and how I can correct it. I can correct it if I understand exactly what's wrong. But if I'm looking at a historic case that I have a complete different recollection of, it's not going to be possible. That's it.
So thank you for the contributions. They're really interesting. And, you know, I think Archie was, I would argue, far too lenient on rs21 and its internal culture. There's massive issues with things like kind of what memorably a comrade called quiet sectarianism, where you just pretend the rest of the left doesn't exist and act actually in quite a sectarian way, but because you're quiet about it, it doesn't matter. And I think that's really negative. And we are trying to change it, but it is taking time. And it's that thing that I was saying in the last session about common sense and trying to break through this. And I think, yeah, Mike identifies that really correctly. But what I'll say is, you know, the 1970s absolutely was producing far better cadre, far fewer splits, and adopting the organizational methods that the rest of the left have adopted have made it much worse, have made splits worse, have lowered the level of political understanding, have worsened categorization. And I suppose my question then is, if your method is so effective, why are you shrinking? Right, and I think you can make the argument that, well, you know, the rest of the left, they have all these problems, and there's this common sense, we're pushing against it, we're a very small minority, and that's true. But if we want to win, it's not enough to be like, well, the rest of the left are shit. We know they're shit. That's what we're starting from, and I think we need to move beyond that. And culture is a very difficult thing to define. You can't really put rules on it, and I think Mike is right to say that if you were to try to put rules on these things, it would be very negative. But I do think things like trying to be more democratic Republican in our methods and in our structures would be good. I think, you know, trying to improve turnover in leadership would be effective, right? And would be something that would improve the Weekly Worker and CPGB as an organization. It would improve every single left organization in this country if, you know, Alex Kalinikos and Hannah Sell and all of these people took some time not as the leadership of these organizations, and that new people came in. Now, that alone is not going to fix it. Of course it isn't. But I think that there needs to be some level of that, because it is effective, right? It raises the level of political knowledge, it raises the categorization, the skills of the people in the organization. If you raise them up to leadership, if you train them up for it. But if you sit in that position of leadership for decades, you're going to struggle. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a few points. Yes. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm Olaf. Yes, from one of the Young Dutch comrades. Yes, but one thing that I noticed, especially in Mike's point, and I also noticed it in his articles, that every time anyone raises whatever kind of point about culture, about the way you word things, it's always referred to this culture of the diplomacy and the fudging over differences, and I think that is a false dichotomy, because in the way that it's presented, it's either you have absolute freedom to insult everyone however you like, whatever. It just in a bit of a caricature, but still. Or it's like the fudging over differences, and that is a big problem. And a lot of in a big part of the left is in the Netherlands, it's a kind of similar culture with like left organizations not talking to each other, and if they talk to each other, they're like really distant and like don't want to criticize each other. So I think one of the a very important thing that we have to do and have to work out is to find a third spot where we have to learn and where we have to theorize about how we do that, how we can discuss with each other, how we can frame those differences in a way that is not all the insulting and where people where you lose your audience, but to do it in a way that is still open and honest, but not in an insulting kind of sense. Another point is that is also a bit following up from that, because what happens a lot, especially at the CPGB, because it's what happens is that a point is taken to its logical conclusion. Someone argues a point, and Yasmin also kind of said it, and it's more efficient to just describe it in a shorthand way, a bit like you did, Mike. Now, with when someone says, "Oh, we should be a bit more strategic about the way we word things," then it immediately goes to, "Oh, it's just about diplomacy and pushing over differences." And I think that way of misrepresenting or like taking arguments to a logical conclusion, it's missing a bit of curiosity, I think, in the standpoint of the other person. And when that happens, then other groups and other people, they also lose their interest to engage with you. And I think that is there's also something that we noticed from the Communist Platform in our discussion about the Ukraine war and about our standpoints with that and how we did that with the Revolutionary Socialist Party, because we felt it was hard to find the real differences because it was just like a shadow boxing match. So that makes it difficult. And to end, I think it's a very important and also a very political question, because the way our culture and the way we discuss things, it makes and it breaks political alliances. The way we also saw with talking about socialism, because I truly believe the way that I'm from an outside perspective, the actual differences are important, but not that big in a way that unity shouldn't be possible. But I think it's purely it's a cultural part, and I'm not saying it's all the fault of CPGB or it's all the fault of talking about socialism. But I think it just illustrates the point that we on the left, we need to find a way to express these differences, which is either not in like fully insulting way, but also not in the diplomatic fudging differences way. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much. Also a Dutch comrade, at least I hope, yeah. Well, was very inspired actually when I started being politically active by the sharp polemics. So it can also attract people, I suppose. Okay, so well, for me, it's not a principled question that every time we have to be the sharpest way we can. That's not a principle for me. Might be for some people, it's not for me. But when you go into this, you say it's not speech controls, but having a culture where we all say hush hush, we have to be comradely. It might be not a formal speech control, but very often is a cultural speech control, isn't it? And I think Mike's point about where do you draw the line is very important. Is Bakuninist an insult? Is saying your position is opportunism? Is that an insult? Is it? I remember at an RSP Congress, a comrade got very angry because someone said they weren't taking the working class seriously. And well, yeah, it was just a political assessment of what the comrade was saying, but it was taken as an insult. And really, even I think the chair even asked the person making the comment to withdraw the comment. So even though there weren't formal speech restrictions, this was kind of imposed anyway. They didn't manage, but so these things of comradely culture do often lead to a culture of speech controls, even if it's not put into writing. I also think it's not just a question of diplomacy. Often it isn't. It's a question of power, and the ones in the left who have power, they, even if it's a very small amount of power, they don't really need to go into harsh polemics because they just use the little power they have against you. I remember we had the discussion with the Mandelites. I totally disagree that it was shadowboxing. They supported arms to Ukraine. They support NATO. They support Navalny at the time. That's not shadowboxing. These were concrete positions they had. But I remember first raising it in a discussion with them. And we rented a room in their building, the Fourth International Building in Amsterdam. And well, we got into a discussion, but they never really got into it afterward. What they did was raise the rent of the room so we could triple the price, and then when we called them social imperialists, basically they took offense, but they never really responded. So I think it's not just a question of diplomacy. It's often a question of the organizations of the left just saying, oh, go onto the street, or I've had bans on members of, I think, the official Communist Party and the IS, which is the SWP, of speaking to me even. So it's these kind of ways, and then we can say, oh, well, I think that's not very commonly, is it? But they're not insulting me. They're not even responding to me. So I think this is a much bigger problem on the left than sometimes using some sharp words, sometimes calling someone an opportunist. I'm not saying we always have to do it. I don't go around in my daily life. Okay, some people disagree with this. I don't try to go around insulting people all the time and call everyone an opportunist, but when it's necessary in a discussion, I don't refrain or don't hold punches either. So yeah, I think that's just some comments I have on this. That's it.
Just in terms of what Kat was saying, use the harshest possible language. I mean, I made the point to her that, you know, when you find someone on the street or, you know, on a demonstration, you know, when you're talking to people, you don't start off by swearing at them and shouting at them. Nothing of the sort. Well, at least I don't. And you know, in terms of the harshest, using harshest possible language, I just don't recognize it. I mean, I seriously don't. Now, maybe that's a fault with me, but if I look, and I think I talked to you about this the other night, if you look at the early reports that I did, for example, on Forging Communist Unity, I used to send them to Kat, I send them to Ed, I send them to Nick, and they might comment, but usually it just came down